One of my favorite drawings that I've ever done is when I took the alley from Minecraft and turned it into a superhero in my first Minecraft Superheroes episode. And for that drawing, I took inspiration from a source that I've never really pulled from before, the magical girls genre. You know, things like Sailor Moon and Cardcaptors. So after looking back at that drawing, I thought it would be kind of fun to do a whole episode based around turning something into magical girls. And in case you hadn't noticed from my last episode where I fused Ruby and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I'm on a little bit of a weird idea kind of bend at the moment. So I thought, why not take some YuGiOh monsters and turn them into magical girls? I've been getting Yu-Gi-Oh requested a decent amount lately. I really loved it as a kid. And specifically a subscriber who goes by 13 Curie Master has been asking that I do a Yu-Gi-Oh episode for about 57 years now or something. I could have that number a little bit wrong, but it has been a long time. So, Yu-Gi-Oh monsters as magical girls. Let's give it a shot. Let's go. Hit like if you want. Subscribe if you feel like. But either way, enjoy the show. For thousands of years, an ancient magic had slumbered beneath the sands of Egypt. This magic lay in the artifacts that had once been made by the gods to grant select humans incredible abilities to fend off the forces of darkness that sought to take over the earth. This dark force was simply called the Shadow, and it had been sealed away in a tomb along with the magical Millennium Staffs. The tomb was buried in an underground cavern, and all along the walls towards it were warnings to never open the tomb. But Maximilian Pegasus didn't listen. He'd read the myths of the power of both the staffs and the shadow and wanted to control both. He arrogantly sought and opened the tomb, but didn't get what he wanted or expected. The Millennium Staffs exploded out of the tomb and soared across the earth, each seeking out their own vessel to grant their abilities too. But the shadow didn't have to go far to find its own vessel. It sensed great darkness lurking inside Pegasus and overtook his body, vowing to find the Millennium Staffs and destroy them along with their vessels, then use Pegasus and his resources to reshape the world in his image. The Shadow thought this would be a relatively easy task, but it underestimated those who soon wielded the staffs. Rose Buraku was a rebellious Japanese high schooler who ditched class at every chance she got. She wasn't a bad kid, but she didn't care for the conventional life path her family was trying to push her down. This made her seem like a troubled youth by those who knew her, but the staff of the Black Flame saw through that to her good heart. This staff flew straight to Rose, thrust itself into her hands, and made her transform for the first time into the vessel of the Black Dragon. She gained the power to fly, shoot black and red flames from her hands and her staff, and gave her a costume with the durability of a dragon's hide. Of course, when she first transformed, she knew none of this. Luckily, it was all explained to her by a small black dragon named Joey. Each staff came with a small, adorable spiritual guide that only the vessel could see. With Joey at her side, Rose quickly learned about her new abilities, the threat that had just been unleashed on the world, and the others she now had to seek out to help her stop Pegasus and the Shadow. Alright, now admittedly for this episode, I was actually more excited to do my design notes than I was to do the lore or stories. Which, by the way, as a side note, would people be interested in episodes where I just do design notes and don't do any lore or stories? I've done less and less of my design notes in episodes over the last year, but sometimes that is kind of the thing I want to talk about more. So if you would be interested in some episodes where I just do design notes, let me know in the comments. But anyway, sorry, that's a bit of a tangent. The reason I was most excited to do this episode is it's always fun to try breaking into a new genre or drawing a thing that you don't draw very often. Like when I started drawing Transformers or mech armors or fantasy armors, I have to go through and study a bunch of other people's designs to see what the visual tropes are for that thing that I want to draw. So for this one, I'd obviously seen images of magical girls before and drawn the occasional one myself, but I wasn't really well versed in the visual tropes. When I started looking into it, there's things like most of them are wearing skirts, there's lots of kind of like frilly tassels flowing off them. Most of them will have some kind of staff or object that helps them transform into a magical girl, and then lots of them will also have some kind of pet familiar that helps teach them things about wherever their magical powers come from. One thing I wanted to try for these to make it a little bit more of a blend of stereotypical magical girl designs and my own art style is try to change how I do the faces, and I think it didn't really end up working out so well for the first two drawings. I tried to make the eyes bigger and more Sailor Moon style, more twinkles and stuff like that, and it just... I don't know, that paired with the way I try to take anime inspiration from the mouth and doing a smaller nose, a more rounded head, it's something that I probably could pull off better if I practiced it more, but I just wasn't really loving how it turned out. So, in fact, for the first two drawings in this episode, I end up, after the screen recording's done, taking them and using some warp tools to kind of shrink them and make them a little bit more narrow. And I do think that ends up making a good difference and making them look better. But besides the face, I really love how this one turned out. It was super fun working with Red Eye's Black Dragon. I was super excited too because Red Eyes is by far my favorite YuGiOh monster. The only one that comes close is Slifer the Sky Dragon, which I think the magical girl from that makes the best drawing in this episode. I'm thinking maybe I should have made her hair black to make it more Red Eye's Black Dragon, because he really is just red eyes and the rest of him is black and gray. But oh well, overall, once I fix up the face a little bit, I'm very happy with this one. Ebony Marahamon didn't have as easy a time getting her abilities as Rose had. Her staff hadn't had to fly as far to get to her as she lived in Cairo, but there was some assembly required with hers. Only the top piece of the forbidden staff came to Ebony, and it wasn't enough to allow her to transform, but it did allow her to meet Atem. He appeared as a small, stout golden man in pharaoh-like garb. Like Joey had with Rose, Atem told Ebony all about the shadow and the staffs, but more pressingly for her, the fact that the 4 other pieces of her staff were still trapped away in the tomb. Because of the overwhelming power of the forbidden staff, it had been broken into 5 pieces, and the 4 other pieces placed in sarcophaguses and buried farther into the tomb. It would be the most difficult staff to acquire, but easily the most necessary in the fight against the shadow. She could easily obliterate many of his forces on her own once she held all 5 pieces, but Ebony would have to travel out to the desert and get the other pieces herself if she wanted to use them in the coming battles. Surprisingly, she was fully willing to set off on this journey. She was a smart, rule-abiding high schooler who had just received acceptance letters to every university her parents had encouraged her to apply to. But before marching off to the next chapter of her academic life, she wanted some kind of thrilling adventure. She set off with Atem at her side, guiding her way. She got as close as she could to the tomb by bus, but eventually had to rent a dune buggy to venture out and find the final location in the desert. She got within sight of it when danger finally lurched its head forth. Pegasus had left, but with his dark powers had called forth a dark blue hovering one-eyed shadow beast called the Relinquished to guard the cave in case there were more treasures inside he'd yet to find. Ebony tried to turn back as she had no powers to protect herself with without the other pieces of the forbidden staff, but the creature had spotted her and was headed right for her. It could have made quick work of her if it weren't for a little help she got from above. Now with our Exodia girl, I knew I wanted to make her a little bit broader and wider, and I ended up giving her a little bit more arm muscle, but it was kind of funny. My base standard sort of thing to do when I'm drawing a character's physique, regardless of whether they're male or female, is give them some kind of arm muscle and tone, give them bigger biceps, make sure their triceps are showing, give them shoulder muscles. But for these drawings, because magical girls tend to be on the more slim and elegant side, I had to kind of fight my instincts. Like I could feel my hand trying to make the arms bigger and bigger, and I had to force myself to be like, no, we're trying out a type of character that doesn't normally have big muscular biceps or tone arms, that kind of stuff, so let's try and stick to the design tropes of the genre we're working with. And that's one of the reasons it's good to try out drawing different kinds of characters that you normally wouldn't. It forces you to take a look at what your standard drawing techniques are and go, okay, maybe this doesn't work for all characters, maybe I should try out different sizes and proportions and stuff like that with other kinds of drawings as well. By the way, as I mentioned with this one, I do end up narrowing out the face after the drawing is done and it ends up looking better. Still not one of my favorite faces, but I really like how the last character's face turns out. And besides that, I really like how the rest of this drawing turns out. I feel like she does represent Exodia well enough while being her own unique character. And weirdly enough, I realized while doing these drawings that I really, really like drawing skirts. That's not something I ever would have realized because I never draw skirts on my characters. Like, I bet if you went back through all of my hundreds of videos on here, you'd find maybe like 4 drawings before this where I'd drawn characters with skirts or dresses. Maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe it's more than that, but in this episode, I realized for whatever reason, they are really fun to draw. Something about this episode was just really, really fun to do, experimenting with a new topic and thinking about... I don't even fully know how to express why this episode was really fun, but I really did like it. Even though I only ended up getting to 3 characters because working with a new set of design tropes that I haven't used before meant each drawing took a little bit longer, but I think the 3 in this are good enough that makes up for the fact that there wasn't a 4th. Anyway, let's take a look at the finished result. Pausing here because I've made a very important observation that everyone needs to be aware of. The fact that if you take all of the pieces of Exodia and push them together without resizing them, he looks like a weird, chunky, angry gnome man. I cracked up when I saw that the first time. I don't know if it's actually that funny. But since I've paused the drawings here anyway, I might as well take a moment to mention the fact that I've got a new series of posters up on my online store that I'm calling my Just Some Cool Stuff posters. So if you've ever wanted a whole bunch of my artwork on your wall without having to buy a whole bunch of different posters, now you can get 20 different PopCross drawings in one. I'll link the first 2 that I've made in the pinned card and in the little bar beneath this video. But anyway, let's get back into the last drawing, shall we? Let's go. From the sky above Ebony, a red streak burst forth, punching a hole through the clouds, then shattering straight through the shadow beast looming over her. The creature had instantly been destroyed, and the figure whipped her pink hair back as sand settled to the ground around her from the impact she'd made. She introduced herself as Selena Sora. Selena had been granted the Sky Staff. It was one of a set of 3 godly staffs, imbued with power that rivaled even those of the Forbidden Staff. The Sky Staff granted her such remarkably fast flight powers that she'd flown all the way from her home in America in under an hour to try and free more staffs that were still trapped away in the tomb. The little friend that came along with her staff was a snake named Slifer, who'd told her that another vessel may need help at the tomb, and luckily, she'd shown up right on time. Not long after, Rose made her way to the tomb as well, just as Selena and Ebony were digging up the last pieces of the Forbidden Staff. They looked broken and useless in their own right, but when all 5 were close together, they began to glow. They swirled above the 3 girls, then reforged into one before their eyes, then settled into Ebony's hands. Ebony finally transformed and felt the overwhelming power of the Forbidden Staff. But that was just the beginning. They'd all have to train with these powers, fight off the other shadow beasts of Pegasus, and make sure that all the other staffs found their vessels. There was much work to be done, but all of these girls were ready to take on the challenge. Now, drawing the face on this one made me finally go, there we go. That's a really nice looking character face. I mean, I'm not trying to bash the other ones, but it's entirely possible that someone looks at those other ones and prefers those to how I did this one. And like I said, it is good to try out different visual styles and take inspiration from how different people in different genres draw their characters. But obviously, I've massaged my visual style so much over the last 3 years and practiced with it that when I just do what my instincts are, then my character is going to look better. And I think one of the reasons this kind of face works better for my rendering is because with a lot of female anime characters, the bigger eyes, the smaller nose, the mouth, even the way I was drawing it there, where it's just sort of 3 rounded lines making the smile a very simple triangle kind of shape, that all works better when you're doing very simple cell shading. Like if you're watching an anime, a lot of the time the character's face will just have one rounded line of shading to give it a little bit of depth. But with my rendering style, it works better when I'm adding more shadows. So having a bigger nose, a slightly more detailed mouth with dimples and shadows under the eyebrows, it just makes it so there's more places for the shadows to naturally fit in. Whereas with the other ones, I was kind of doing some vague, very rounded shadows, and the head just looks like a bit of a ball. Hope I explained that well, but anyway, so for this one, I really like how the face ends up turning out. I really love the hair I end up putting on this one, and working with Slifer the Sky Dragon as the base for the inspiration for this was super fun because I really, really love Slifer's design. I did really want to add some kind of mask inspired by Slifer's face, but when I was looking at design tropes for magical girls, I didn't see a single mask on a character, so I was like, nope. I'm working in this genre, I should stick with the visual tropes of this genre. If I added a mask, it would have looked too much like a regular superhero kind of character, which magical girls are kind of like a subgenre of superheroes. They didn't really start out that way. I watched a video on Crunchyroll's YouTube channel talking about the history of magical girls and how they sort of shifted into being a bit more superhero-like when Sailor Moon came out, because Sailor Moon took inspiration from Power Rangers for how the stories were formatted. But yeah, I just lost my train of thought there, not sure where I was going with that, but again, had lots of fun with this one. I made the skirt a little bit more intricate, tried some different details inspired by some other different magical girl series that I don't even necessarily know the names of. And overall, this is my favorite drawing from the episode, but even with the faces being a little bit janky in my opinion in the first two, I really like how all three of these turned out. Hope you all liked them as well. Let's take a look at this last one. I honestly have no idea how popular this topic will be for my audience in terms of making more videos out of it, but I am definitely happy to do more of this, because I do feel like I kind of just scratched the surface of design ideas that I could do with magical girl kind of characters. So if you are interested in me turning more things into magical girls, or even doing a follow-up to this, doing more YuGiOh Monsters as magical girls, please let me know in the comments. Or any other ideas that you have for me. And of course, if you're new to the channel, I have used some Yu-Gi-Oh characters in scattered episodes before, like in my anime characters on the Suicide Squad video. But if you want a good video to watch after this one, I'd recommend the very first Minecraft Superheroes episode, because it's the one that kind of inspired this episode to happen. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or uplifting note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is to remember that your day is as positive as your mindset. If you feed your mind positive things throughout your days will be more positive. I hope that's helpful to someone out there. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.